Some stories arrive like a tide. Quiet at first, a whisper beneath the waves until they find the shore and refuse to leave. This one began with a photograph. A woman dressed in blue, standing where no footprints should remain, her eyes fixed not on the lens but on the sea beyond it. They called her the Lady in Blue, a name so simple it almost hides the truth, because names are a kind of mercy, and mercy is not what haunts Key West. The locals say she appears when the storm rises. Others claim she never left the water at all. But I've seen the images, I've heard the stories that didn't make the papers, and somewhere between the salt and the silence, there is a soul still waiting to be remembered. The house stood on pilings, its timbers grey and scarred from years of storms. Each board exhaled the smell of salt and old rain. When the wind rose, the shutters clapped like slow applause. Lantern light trembled through thin curtains, painting wavering gold onto the warped floor. The air was heavy, as though the sea itself pressed against the walls. Inside, she sat by the window, a young woman not yet old, but already hollowed by waiting. Her hair, once the colour of bronze shells, now hung dull, threaded with humidity and dust. She sewed in silence, the needle glinting as it pierced cloth, the hue of midnight water. Each stitch was a heartbeat she refused to lose. The dress was draped beside her chair, the same one she had meant to wear on the day that never came. It was blue, because he had said it made her look like the horizon. Outside, fishermen laughed in the tavern, and she heard their joy as if it were coming from a distant shore. The laughter hurt more than silence. She could smell their rum, the tang of seaweed, the smoke from their lamps. Life continued, but not for her. The tide crawled closer every evening, leaving small tokens beneath her window, shells, driftwood, and once a single white feather that stuck to the sill until the rain took it. She watched the horizon as though it might breathe his name back to her. Her eyes burned from the salt in the air, or from tears. She could no longer tell which. The walls sighed in rhythm with the sea, and in that slow, breathing house she lived as though the world had already drowned. The night before he sailed, they met at the pier where the planks were slick with algae and moonlight. He smelled of rope and cedar oil, and she could taste salt when he kissed her. His hands shook when he drew a circle of brine on her palm, a sailor's vow. "Before the summer's last storm," he whispered, and she believed him because faith is a kind of blindness that feels holy. The wind was soft that night, carrying the faraway call of a ship's bell. Behind them, Key West slept uneasily, lanterns guttering in the heat. They stood in the hush between tides, hearts tuned to the same slow rhythm of the sea. When dawn bled over the water, he was gone, his ship already a pale shape leaning toward the horizon. She watched until her eyes ached, until the blue between sea and sky became one endless, merciless color. Days turned into weeks. The salt circle faded from her skin, but not from her mind. She reread his letter until the ink blurred from her tears, and her thumb wore holes in the paper. She tried to eat, to sleep, to breathe, without tasting the ocean that had swallowed him whole. Every creak of a dock rope, every snap of canvas in the harbour made her heart leap, then sink. The townsfolk began to speak of her softly, with pity and superstition mixed in equal measure. Some said she was cursed, others said love had driven her mad. At night she walked the shoreline barefoot, whispering his name into the wind. The tide always came to meet her, greedy and kind in the same breath. It licked the hem of her gown as though testing the weight of its future. The moonlight made her skin appear like porcelain left too long in the rain. She watched her reflection shimmer, fractured by ripples, and saw in it both bride and widow. The sea whispered back to her, not in words, but in a low pulse that felt like memory. When lightning far offshore flashed for the first time that season, she smiled faintly. Somewhere inside that smile was a promise she no longer expected anyone to keep. It began with thunder that rolled across the sea like furniture being dragged across a floor. The fishermen on the beach were gathering their nets when they saw it, something bobbing in the surf, heavy and unwilling to sink. By the time they reached it, the sky had turned the color of pewter, and gulls were wheeling above as if keeping vigil. It was a chest, swollen from salt and swollen with secrets. Its hinges had bloomed with rust, its wood pulsing with water. When they pried it open, the air changed. A damp, briny breath spilled out and settled over them. Inside, the sea had kept its own order, its own cruel arrangement of what mattered. A locket holding a curl of hair, a pair of brass buttons, a rosary tangled in a chain, and a length of blue ribbon coiled like a sleeping snake. It was not the chest they feared, but the feeling that it had chosen to return. They carried it up the sand to her doorstep because the island had a way of giving burdens to the one who least deserved them. She opened the lid with hands that did not shake, though her throat did. When she saw the ribbon, her ribbon, she did not scream. She took it gently, as though afraid it might still be alive. Later, she tied it around her wrist, tight enough to leave a mark. The color looked wrong in the candlelight. Too deep, too knowing. It began to slide down her arm, slipping loose, as if rejecting her. The knot wouldn't hold. Wet ribbon never does. Neighbors watched from their porches as she walked to the water that night. The tide lapped at her feet, playful, cruel, familiar. She whispered something to the sea that only the wind heard, and when she turned back, her face was dry. There are griefs that have burned so hot they leave no moisture behind. That night, the chest was gone. The tide had come again and claimed what it had offered, taking back its gifts. Only the ribbon remained, tangled in the pilings of the pier, fluttering against the wood like a small, stubborn ghost. In a place surrounded by water, children learn early what it means to drown, but she learned slowly, the way grief teaches, one breath at a time, one denial after another. The reef was a living cathedral, full of color and quiet violence. Fish darted like streaks of glass, and coral rose like old bones from the sand. She went there when she could no longer bear the house, the dress, or the sound of her own heart. The sun pressed down so hot that the sea looked solid, a sheet of molten blue glass. At first she only waded to her knees. The water lapped against her skin, warm as breath. She would stand for hours staring toward the horizon, whispering to the waves as though they might answer. People saw her and turned away. Islanders respect those who speak to the sea. They know the sea sometimes answers. As the weeks passed, she began to wade deeper, waist, then ribs. The dress wrapped itself around her like a lover unwilling to let go. The silk darkened until it looked almost black, the fabric clinging to her body, heavy and soft as a shroud. She felt lighter in the water, almost free. The sea pulled at her hair, stroked her arms, whispered against her skin in soft eddies. It wanted her back, and she began to understand why so many things allowed themselves to be taken. The day she cut the hem of her gown, the knife in her hand trembled. She told herself it was practicality, but when she slit the fabric, it sighed, a sound that felt too human to be coincidence. The dress seemed to breathe in before the cut and exhale as the blade passed through. When she stepped back into the surf that evening, she didn't stop at her knees. The water wrapped her waist, her chest, her throat. The salt stung her eyes and filled her mouth, but she did not retreat. For a moment she felt him there beside her, the sailor she had loved, his hand reaching, his voice calling. Then it was only the sea, and her reflection trembling on its surface like a dying star. The tide that night was higher than any before. It crept up to the porch of her house and lingered, as though waiting for an answer. By late summer, the air itself seemed sick. The horizon no longer promised dawn, but danger. The palms bowed to a sky bruised with thunderheads, and the ocean turned the color of tarnished coins. Every sound felt wrong, too distant, too still. Even the crickets went quiet, as if the island had been told to listen. In those days, storms didn't have names. They were known only by memory, by loss, by the things they took. The people of Key West had learned to read the wind like scripture. A pause in the air, a shift in the scent of rain, a silence so deep it made the heart forget its rhythm. She knew it too. She felt it long before the clouds gathered, the pulse of something coming for her. Maybe she even welcomed it. That afternoon she lit every lamp in her home and watched their flames bow toward the sea. The walls shivered, the floor trembled beneath her bare feet. Outside, fishermen hauled their boats inland, crossing themselves, whispering prayers half in Spanish, half in fear. They saw her standing at the edge of the pier in that impossible blue gown, the silk stirring in the rising wind. She was barefoot, hair loose, eyes open to the dark that rolled toward her. Lightning flickered far inside the storm, illuminating her silhouette, fragile but defiant. When the first wind struck, it carried salt so sharp it cut the skin. Her dress lifted and billowed like a captured sky, and for one breathtaking instant she seemed weightless. Then came the wave. It wasn't large, only wrong. It struck from the side instead of straight on, twisting the water like a living hand. She gasped, but made no sound. The blue folded around her, the sea's fingers curling her inward. Her ribbon snapped, a small bright wound against the grey world, and then she was gone, swallowed in a single, seamless motion. The lanterns in the harbour swung wildly. Somewhere a church bell rang, though no one had pulled the rope. When the water closed, the island exhaled. The storm screamed overhead, breaking the sky open. The people shut their doors and did not speak her name until the rain stopped. And when it did, the sea was calm again, too calm, as though it had eaten well and needed to rest. I have learned this much. The cruelty of water lies not in its hunger, but in its indifference. The morning after the storm, the island was washed pale. Palm fronds lay scattered like torn wings. The air smelled of lime, mud, and rot. The harbour was still, too still. Even the waves seemed to hold their breath. 3 fishermen came to check the boats that had survived. The youngest carried a flask for courage. The oldest carried superstition. They found the docks half buried in seaweed and splintered wood. And there, at the edge of the channel, the air began to shimmer. She was standing in the shallows. At first they thought it was a trick of light, a reflection maybe, or smoke from a lantern that hadn't gone out. But then the mist parted, and they saw her clearly. Her gown trailing like spilled ink in the water, her hair moving as if under a slow current. Her face was pale, lips parted as though caught mid-breath. The eyes, they were not dead, they were too aware. The oldest fisherman fell to his knees, whispering prayers to saints who had no jurisdiction here. The youngest tried to speak her name, but his throat betrayed him. His voice came out small, thin, unworthy. She turned her head toward him, so gently it seemed time itself slowed to watch. The air grew colder. The surface of the sea rippled, though no wind touched it. Around her feet the fish did not scatter. They gathered, circling like moths around a flame that could not burn. She raised her hand once, not in greeting, not in warning, but in remembrance. The gesture was human, but the stillness behind it was not. Then the light shifted, and she was gone, dissolved, absorbed, or perhaps reclaimed by the water she now belonged to. When they finally moved again, the fishermen found their knives wet, though they had not been drawn. One said he had seen her mouth move as if speaking beneath the tide. Another said she smiled. The youngest said nothing. He never went back to sea. That evening, a blue sheen coated the surface of the harbour. Lanterns reflected off it and bent strangely, as though the water had decided to keep part of the light for itself. She had returned, and the island knew it.
The dead, when they return, do not speak in words. They create rules, and the living learn them by surviving. She did not haunt as a wraith screams or a candle flickers. She haunted by existing, quietly, persistently, beautifully wrong. Those who saw her learned her rhythm and came to know her patterns. She walked only where the sea touched wood, her feet leaving no prints, her gown whispering against the planks of piers and boathouses. In the beginning, Her visits were rare. A flicker of blue seen through storm rain. A chill that crept through a window left cracked. But soon every family that lived near the harbour had a story. A soft hand pressing against glass during the black hour before dawn. A window fogged from the outside. The gentle knock of something that wanted to come in but never needed to. The island learned her rules. If you spoke a loved one's name into the wind, she would turn her head toward you. If you set a lamp near the tide on a moonless night, she might appear at its edge, drawn to light like a creature who still missed warmth. If you wore blue near the water, she would stand behind you, silently watching until you stepped away. The fishermen began to count her appearances. If she stood near the reef on a new moon, they brought their boats in early. If she was seen beneath a full one, they left offerings, bread, rum, a flower or two stolen from the churchyard to float away with the tide. Some claimed she blessed their nets, filling them with silver fish. Others swore she marked them instead, their catches rotting before dawn. Children grew up knowing that to call her was dangerous and to ignore her was worse. Parents told them that when she appeared near your door, it was not for you. It was for someone else in the house who would soon follow her path into the deep. She became less of a woman and more of a clock, measuring time not by sun or season but by grief. And though none would admit it aloud, there were nights when the wind was soft and the tide glowed faintly blue when the people of Key West found comfort in her presence. The island was small, the storms were cruel, and the lady in blue was constant. She had become something rarer than love. She had become certainty.
Years passed, and still her story would not die. The house she once called home stood empty, its timbers bleached by salt, its shutters hanging limp like tired wings. The ocean wind sang through its cracks, and even the rats refused to nest within its walls. Locals called it La Casa del Marido Perdido, the house of the lost husband. Every year, on the anniversary of the storm, something shifted. The front door, swollen from humidity, would creak open on its own and remain ajar until dusk. The porch boards, warped and soft, groaned as if under the weight of unseen feet. And those who dared to step inside said the air was thick with the smell of iron and lilies, the scent of old blood and old mourning. In the parlour, the blue gown no longer hung on its peg. The peg remained, though the wall behind it bore a pale shadow shaped like a shoulder. Upstairs, the bed was always freshly turned. Dust refused to settle. The mirror above the vanity was permanently fogged, as though it remembered too much. A wet footprint, delicate and bare, was found on the stair each year. It never dried. Once I walked through that house myself. The boards bent under my weight, as though remembering another visitor. The air was heavy, the silence thick enough to taste. I found myself standing by the same window where she once sat, sewing, where the sea had been her horizon and her undoing. The harbour light beyond the glass wavered, its reflection rippling across the room. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw her there, head bowed, fingers busy with thread that wasn't there, the faintest shimmer of blue spilling over her lap. Then the floor tilted, and I understood I was no longer welcome. I left the way all the living do when the dead remind them of their place, quickly, quietly, pretending not to run. That night, lightning cracked above the channel, and a single blue ribbon appeared, knotted around the front gate. It was soaked through. Though there had been no rain, no one ever tried to rent the house again. It had found its purpose, to remember her when no one else dared to. The diver had always been a man of reason. He believed in pressure, in breath, in depth measured by rope and air. He had heard the stories, of course, every sailor had, but he did not believe in ghosts. He believed in currents. He believed in mistakes. When he lowered himself into the channel that morning, the sun was thin and the sea glass flat. The island had not yet begun to stir. He tied a rope around his chest and let the other end coil in the hands of his friend on the boat. Then he slipped under. The water closed over him like an eyelid. Light fractured and bent, the world above becoming a wavering ghost of its own. He descended through shades of blue that darkened with every heartbeat. Sky blue, steel blue, the blue of old bruises. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became, until even the sound of his pulse seemed too loud. Then he saw her. She was drifting just above the reef, her gown spreading around her like a blossom of silk. The fabric moved, though the water was still. Her hair floated in tendrils, gold and grey at once. Her face was both clear and unformed, like the moon seen through thin cloud. He reached toward her, and she moved closer without moving at all. The rope around his chest tightened, as though the ocean itself had drawn breath. He felt her eyes before he saw them, eyes that did not look at him but through him, as if she were searching for the part of him already lost to the deep. For a moment she looked like someone he had once loved, or dreamed of loving, or lost before he could name. A flicker of warmth bloomed in his chest and then froze, solid as coral. He tried to speak, but the words filled with salt before leaving his throat. She reached out her hand and touched his sternum with 2 fingers. The pressure was soft, deliberate, absolute. His heart stuttered. The rope around him snapped taut, pulling him upward. His lungs burned. The sea's colour fractured into ribbons of light, and then he was coughing on the surface, retching brine and half-breaths. When he finally opened his eyes, the horizon looked the same, but he knew the sea had changed for him. It no longer sounded like waves, it sounded like breathing. He lived another 20 years, but never again near the water. Each night when the wind shifted from the south, a faint line of salt appeared across his chest, right where her fingers had pressed. He called it the mark of mercy. I call it recognition. The lighthouse was the island's eye, forever open, forever watching. From its height, the sea stretched in every direction, a living thing, endless and hungry. The keeper who tended it was a patient man. He had seen storms carve ships apart, and had written down each loss with a precision that bordered on reverence. One evening, while a storm gathered far offshore, he noticed the light from his lamp flicker. He checked the wick, the oil, the glass. Everything was sound, yet the flame dipped again, bowing toward the sea as if greeting someone unseen. He stepped to the window and peered out into the grey. There, at the edge of the reef, a figure stood in the surf. The rain had not yet come, but her gown already rippled as though under water. The keeper froze, one hand gripping the frame. Her presence was impossible and undeniable. The light above him flared, casting a blue reflection across the room. Later, in his ledger, he wrote, "The lamp, dimmed without cause, returned brighter, witnessed a woman in the channel. Possible reflection, possible warning." The next week, a schooner nearly wrecked on the reef during a sudden squall. The captain swore a pale light, cold and blue, had flickered ahead of them, guiding their turn at the last moment. They called it divine. The keeper called it familiar. Each time the light faltered, he recorded the event, marking beside it a single drawn line. Her silhouette, sketched in quick, uncertain strokes. Over the years, his margins became full of her, blue pencil smudges, faint outlines of her gown trailing into nothing. The ink bled in damp weather, staining the pages like watermarks. The final entry was simple. Storm approaching, light strong, she near again. They found him at dawn, seated at his desk, head bowed over the open book. His hand had stiffened around the pencil, which had broken across the paper. Outside the sky was clear, the light still burned, but on the lens a faint blue stain shimmered, catching the sun and throwing it across the waves like a final gesture. That night, from the beach, people saw the lighthouse beam cut a single blue path across the water. It stretched farther than it should have, straight toward the horizon, where no ship waited, only the endless dark. The new keeper tried to clean the lens. The stain would not come off. He stopped trying after the 3rd night, when the sea began to whisper at his door. After the keeper's death, the island changed in ways no storm could explain. Church bells cracked, flowers withered on their stems before Mass, laughter thinned on the breeze. The people did not say why, but they all knew. The sea had taken its bride, and the island had learned what fidelity costs. That summer, no one married. The seamstress who made wedding dresses refused to touch anything dyed even near the color of sky. When one woman begged for white silk, the needle slipped and drew blood. Proof, they said, that the bride beneath the waves was jealous. The young men who fished in the channels laughed to hide their fear. They still toasted the sea before setting out, but their eyes betrayed them, flicking to the horizon as if expecting to see a figure walking across it. The older sailors warned them not to mock her. The ocean listens, they said, and it remembers. One morning, a skiff went out, a small boat carrying 3 men who thought the calm water meant they were safe. The sun was clean and the sky endless. They joked, sang, even drank a little. When the first gust of cold air brushed their backs, they turned too late. She was beside them. The lady rose from the water like a reflection stepping out of a mirror. Her gown streamed around her, alive with motion though the sea itself was still. Her face was not cruel nor kind. It was the face of something that had forgotten both. The youngest man reached for her. He said later it felt like reaching into memory, soft and cold and absolute. Then he was gone, pulled under without splash or struggle. The others froze, unable to speak. When they returned, the sea was calm again. They rowed in silence, their eyes hollow as dried shells. That night the island gathered at the chapel. No one sang. No one rang the cracked bell. The women carried candles, their flames bending with the wind, and set them in the sand at the shoreline. The light stretched out across the water, a field of tiny stars trembling in her honor, or in warning. When dawn came, every candle was gone. Only wet circles in the sand remained and small blue stains where the wax had once been. The island took it as a message. There would be no more weddings that year, not out of fear, but out of respect for the bride who never came home. By autumn, her name had become a prayer, not the kind said in church, but whispered into storm winds and salt air. People spoke to her when no one else could help. They asked her to return things the sea had taken, sons, brothers, husbands, trinkets swallowed by the tide. She returned nothing, except once. There was a woman with a small boy who could not sleep. He woke each night screaming, claiming to hear waves beneath the floorboards, to smell the ocean inside his room. His mother, desperate, brought him down to the shore at dusk, where the horizon burned in shades of violet and dying gold. The air was heavy. The tide was pulling hard. The woman knelt in the sand and held her child, murmuring words she barely believed in. She begged the lady in blue to leave her son alone, to grant him peace, or take her instead. The sea answered with a hush so complete that even the wind seemed afraid. The boy stopped crying, his gaze fixed on something beyond the waterline, something his mother could not see. Then the blue began to rise. It wasn't light, not really, but a color deep and soft, unfurling beneath the surface. The woman saw it first as a shimmer, then a form. The lady appeared at the edge of the drop, her gown moving like smoke underwater. Her face was pale, unbroken by time or tide. The boy's fear melted into wonder. He reached toward the apparition, his small hand trembling with the courage of innocence. The lady leaned forward slightly, and for an instant it seemed she might smile. Then she looked past them, her eyes fixed on something neither living nor present, and vanished. The water closed over the glow, and the tide sighed as though exhaling a long-held breath. That night, the boy slept soundly for the first time in months. In the morning, his mother found a seashell in his hand, smooth, pale, and spiraled in a way no shell from their shores ever had been. The shell hummed faintly when held to the ear, not like the rush of the ocean, but like the echo of a lullaby sung from far below. The boy grew up to be a sailor. He never spoke of the lady, but he kept that shell in his pocket all his life. It was said that in the last storm he ever faced, he was smiling when the sea took him. It began without pattern, like all hauntings do. One morning, a pair of shoes appeared on the shoreline. Small, leather, sun-swollen, their buckles eaten by rust. A week later, another pair. Then more. Men's boots, women's slippers, a child's sandal with a bit of seaweed threaded through its strap. At first, the people thought they were wreckage, spoils from ships lost in storms, washed ashore by restless tides. But the shoes came even when the seas were calm, even when the moon was high and kind. They appeared in neat rows, always near the waterline, as though someone had placed them there with care. The islanders began to whisper. "She's collecting them," they said. "She's taking back what belongs to her." No one ever saw her do it, of course, but they felt her presence in the morning hush when the sand was still wet and untouched. The prints left near the shoes were not human. They were shallow, round, almost as if made by drops of water that refused to sink. Children dared each other to touch them, to pick one up. Those who did spoke of a cold that sank straight into the bone, colder than any winter the Keys had ever known. A few swore they heard a woman sigh when they turned the shoes over, a breath that came from nowhere, yet everywhere. It became a quiet ritual. When someone was lost at sea, their family left shoes by the water, pairs for those who had walked the world, singles for those who had not yet finished their path. Sometimes the shoes vanished overnight, sometimes they stayed for days before dissolving into salt. The people said she took the pairs and left the singles, choosing who had earned the journey home. Soon the beach became a cemetery without graves, rows of worn souls, cracked leather, and silent prayers. And in the moonlight, when the tide was low, the villagers swore they could see her walking just beyond the surf, barefoot, blue, unburdened, passing among the shoes as though counting the living. The year the great hurricane came, the sky turned the color of lead before sunrise. The air felt heavy, swollen with waiting. Birds vanished inland, the water along the reef went black. It was the kind of silence that makes people whisper, even when they're alone. By midday the wind screamed like something alive. The palms bent double, the ocean climbed its own spine and tried to swallow the island whole. Roofs tore away like paper, rain hammered the windows until the glass began to bow. And yet, in the chaos, some swore they saw a woman walking along the reef line, small, impossibly calm, her gown streaming around her like liquid silk. The lightning illuminated her each time it struck, freezing her in glimpses. A painting made of stormlight. She was not fighting the wind, she was leading it. Each time she lifted her arm, the hurricane shifted, its core twisting as though uncertain of its course. The sea rose, then settled, like a beast obeying a command it could not understand. The fishermen watching from their shuttered homes wept openly, though none could say why. By dawn, the storm broke apart. The island survived, the churches still stood. Even the harbour's oldest boats had only drifted, not sunk. The people emerged from their homes and found the air clear, the sea still trembling, the light impossibly clean. A single piece of blue fabric lay tangled in the mangroves, soft, dry, untouched by the storm. They carried it to the chapel and pinned it above the door, believing it to be her gift or her warning. In the years that followed, whenever the winds began to howl, the people whispered her name instead of prayers. It was said that the ocean listened, that she listened, and that every hurricane that came after bent just slightly off its path, as though giving her island a wide, respectful berth. The storms, too, had learned to dance with her. By the 1890s, the island had grown louder. Tourists came on small ships, curious about the tales that drifted through the taverns of the Blue Bride of Key West, the spirit said to walk the waves. Her story had become an attraction, a polite ghost for an impolite world. Among the visitors was a photographer from Charleston, a man proud of his science and skeptical of superstition. He brought with him a camera encased in polished mahogany, a black hood, and the arrogance of someone who believed light could not lie. He stayed in a small room above a bait shop near the docks. Each evening he carried his tripod to the end of the pier, setting it toward the water where the locals warned him not to point. They watched him from a distance, whispering that he would learn the way others had, through loss, not through proof. For weeks he saw nothing, the horizon blurred with heat, the sea endless and blank. But one night the air thickened, even the stars seemed dimmer. The tide was unnaturally high, swallowing the sand. And then, as if she had been waiting for his vanity to ripen, she rose from the surf. He lifted the camera's cap. Through the lens, the world bent. The woman was there, luminous, her gown rippling with its own light, her face soft as fog. He held his breath, counted 1, 2, 3, and covered the plate again. When he developed it hours later, he realized the plate had burned. The chemicals hissed, the silver blackened, and where her figure should have been, there was only a bright wound of nothing, white where light had been consumed. He developed another and another. Each plate came out the same. The more he tried, the more violent the failures became, streaks of pure blue-white tearing through the glass like veins of lightning. His dark room filled with the smell of salt and ozone. That night, he dreamt of her. She was not cruel, but her eyes were empty mirrors. When he woke, the floor was wet. He left Key West before dawn, abandoning his camera to the tide. The fisherman who found it later said the lens was cracked but still glowed faintly in the dark. The plates ended up in a museum years later. They hang in a quiet back hallway where visitors pass without noticing, simple rectangles of ghosted light. But those who stop long enough, those who stare into the nothingness, swear they can hear the ocean breathing. Light remembers more than it should. She was an old woman now, the last of her generation, her voice soft and cracked like dried coral. She'd seen the lady in blue 3 times in her life, once as a child, once as a mother, and once, she hoped, as a farewell. Her hair was silver, her eyes clouded with years, but they still reflected the harbour. She asked her daughter to take her to the pier at sunset. The sky was the same colour it had been that first time she'd seen the ghost, a bruised, tender blue that promised both ending and peace. The sea was calm, but there was a weight in the air, a sense that something had been waiting for her. She walked to the rail, her body trembling with each step, but her gaze steady. "She'll come," she said, not as a prayer, but as a certainty. The tide shifted, darkened, shimmered. The blue began to rise beneath the surface like ink seeping through cloth. The old woman smiled. "You kept your promise," she whispered. The lady stood just beyond the waterline, her gown a current of motion and moonlight. For a moment the two mirrored each other, one made of flesh, one of memory. The old woman raised a hand in greeting. The lady inclined her head in return, an echo of human grace long forgotten. When the wind stirred, carrying the scent of salt and lilies, the woman closed her eyes and breathed it in deeply, as though filling herself with the sea. Her daughter reached to steady her, but she was already gone, still standing, still smiling, her body light as driftwood. They carried her home before nightfall, but at dawn, when they went to lay flowers by the pier, they found a single handprint of salt left on the rail, 5 perfect marks that shimmered in the sunlight. Rain did not wash it away. Years later, the young boys of the island dared each other to press their palms over that mark. Some did, laughing, but every one of them woke that night with the taste of the sea on their tongues, and the faint sound of a woman's voice singing from beneath their beds. The lady had found another generation to remember her, and perhaps that is all ghosts ever want, to not be forgotten. There comes a time in every haunting when distance no longer matters. The lady had been bound to the shoreline for decades, drawn by the tides that had taken her, comforted by the waves that remembered her body's weight. But one autumn night, under a moon swollen and low, she looked beyond the surf and saw the faint tremor of lamps inland. The air smelled of guava and rust. The living were close, and she had not forgotten them. The wind carried her ashore like a sigh. The water that once held her up now trailed behind, a long, shimmering veil that soaked into the sand and left no mark. She walked barefoot through the narrow streets, her gown dripping quietly, each drop darkening the boards of porches and the white shells that lined the paths. Dogs hid, lamps guttered, the mangroves along the lane shivered as if stirred by her passing. She stopped before each house that faced the sea. Some she knew by scent, by memory, by sorrow. Inside, she could hear the steady hum of human life, a mother whispering a prayer before sleep, a child coughing, a man turning restlessly in his bed, the sounds of breathing and warmth that she no longer owned. For a moment, her hand hovered before a window pane, a thin layer of glass and years separating her from the world she had lost. The glass fogged, not from within, but from without. If you were inside, you might have seen her, a pale face blurred by condensation, a smudge of blue, the impression of eyes like candle flames beneath water. But when you blinked, she would be gone, leaving behind only a faint ring of salt. Those who saw her never spoke of it directly. They left offerings again at the shore, white flowers, bits of silk, small mirrors turned face down. They said it was gratitude, but gratitude is just another kind of fear. For nights afterward, when the moon rode low, she wandered the inland streets. Mirrors clouded, windows rattled. Some said she was searching for her house again, but the truth was simpler. She was listening. Somewhere, far away, a cracked church bell tried to remember the note of her wedding day. She followed its echo through the dark until the sound thinned and vanished, and the first light of morning showed her how far she had strayed. Then she turned back toward the sea, her dress dragging the dawn behind her, and the island exhaled in relief. I have turned this tale over in my hands so many times that the edges have worn smooth. I have compared charts and tides, read the ledgers of men long dead, searched for logic where there is only longing. Still, I find her everywhere, written in the salt that crusts the windows of Key West houses, in the names of boats, in the lull between thunder and rain. The fishermen still leave bread on the pier when the air feels heavy. The widows still walk the beach at dusk and whisper into the surf. No one calls her ghost anymore. She has become something older, something necessary, the island's breath between storms. What is she now? Perhaps a warning, yes, but not of danger, of devotion, of the weight love leaves behind when it cannot find rest. She is the covenant between grief and gratitude, the proof that even the sea, indifferent and endless, can be taught to remember. I have seen other hauntings that fade when the last witness dies, but she endures. Her story has slipped beneath the skin of the island. Children are born knowing not to wear blue near the water. Sailors pause before casting off and look for the pale shimmer on the reef. In time, they forget her name but not her presence. It is enough. When I close my eyes, I can still see her, not as a ghost, but as motion, blue light folding and unfolding, the pulse of a tide that has learned compassion. She is there when storms turn aside, when the sea stills for no reason, when the night air smells faintly of lilies and rain that has not yet fallen. I have come to understand that not all hauntings are curses. Some are promises that refuse to die. In my study, the lamps cast small rivers of gold across the desk. The ledger before me is damp at the edges where my hand rests. Outside, the rain begins again, steady, patient. I can hear it tapping against the glass like fingers. The flame leans once, then steadies. If you ever find yourself in Key West on such a night, when the air tastes of salt and the horizon glows the faintest blue, walk to the pier and wait. Do not speak. She does not answer words, she answers waiting. And if she comes, you will feel it, that sudden calm, that deep pull beneath the ribs. You will understand that love is heavier than death, and that water, for all its hunger, never forgets what it holds. I watch, I remember, I do not intervene.